Order, order. I now declare open the 60th Annual Session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I'd like to welcome you to this plenary session of our Assembly here in The Hague. In particular, I'd like to welcome Mrs. Anke Broekers-Koenol, President of the Netherlands Senate, and Mrs. Anoushka van Miltenburg, Speaker of the Netherlands House of Representatives, who are with us for the start of our proceedings this morning. Could I also welcome Mr. Josias Johannes van Aartsen, Mayor of The Hague, who was, of course, a host at the reception last night, which was a magnificent evening. We thank you for it. I'd also like to thank the head of the Netherlands delegation, Mr. Hanten Broeker, for hosting the annual session. I didn't need to invite you to express your appreciation. You've done that, and the appreciation is very well deserved. Before I make my opening address, I'd like us all to remember the victims of Flight MH17. This was a tragedy for all of us, but I remind the Assembly that 196 of the 298 passengers and crew in the flight were citizens of the Netherlands. And in honor of all the victims, I invite the Assembly to rise for a minute's silence. Thank you, colleagues. This appalling act makes it clear to all of us just what the consequences are for our citizens when security breaks down. Prime Minister, colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This 60th annual session in The Hague marks the end of my mandate as President of the Assembly. It has been a great privilege and honor for me to lead and represent this organization for the past 2 years. 2 years which have brought major changes to our security environment and which have deeply changed NATO too. Our nations face new and complex challenges, both to the east and the south. In the east, Russia is attempting to oppose a new order by force, trampling on the sovereign rights of its neighbors and on the principles which underpin our international system. To the south, we face an arc of fragility and instability extending from North Africa and the Sahel to the Middle East and Central Asia. Now, there are people in our countries, and I might say legislators too, who do not see Russia's actions in Ukraine as a threat to our interests or security. Some are lured by Russia's lies and propaganda. Others simply want to bury their heads in the sand. But I believe that we, in this Assembly, who have the benefit of the insider briefings from our governments and NATO leaders and independent experts, have a responsibility to counter these lies and to tell the public the truth. Russia argues today that NATO never treated it with the respect which it deserves. Yet for 25 years, NATO gave Russia the benefit of the doubt, put out the hand of friendship, and sought to build a post-Cold War partnership based on trust. Our governments provided Russia with aid and technical assistance and invited Russia to observe NATO exercises and to appoint an ambassador to NATO headquarters. But Russia torpedoed that trust when it sent troops into Ukraine and annexed Crimea on the bogus pretext of protecting the rights of the very people whose rights it was undermining by use of force. Still today, Russia continues to provide troops and equipment to prop up armed separatists in eastern Ukraine, while ludicrously denying any involvement and attempting to blame others for the escalation of a conflict which is clearly of Russia's making. Russia's use of military force to annex another country's sovereign territory and its support for separatist movements violates the rules and principles on which our international system is based, and which Russia itself, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has a duty to respect and protect. This is why Russia's actions in Ukraine are unacceptable and dangerous. And having acted this way against Ukraine today and Georgia in 2008, it is inevitable that people ask, where next? We need to respond firmly, not to escalate tensions, but because we need to deter further breaches of the international rule of law. In April, our Assembly decided to revoke Russia's associate membership. This was painful, but necessary. We believe in dialogue, but dialogue only works if both sides respect each other, engage in a meaningful exchange, and are ready to make compromises. Sadly, the Russian parliamentarians who attended our Assembly as associate members were not committed to this approach. The current distance between us is particularly regrettable because many of the challenges and dangers which we face also affect Russia, and in better circumstances, we would be working with them hand in hand to address these problems. En Libye, l'autorité du gouvernement central est remise en cause par les nombreuses milices armées et des groupes terroristes profitent de la zone de non-droit. Le Mali continue de combattre les groupes terroristes qui se sont emparés du nord du pays pour ensuite marcher sur Bamako en janvier 2013. Je suis ravi d'avoir conduit la toute première visite de l'Assemblée au Mali en mai 2013 et d'être retourné à Bamako le mois dernier pour démontrer notre intérêt et notre soutien continu. Je voudrais saluer la présence d'une délégation de Mali ici à notre session. I'm also delighted that a parliamentary delegation from Iraq could join us, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to them as well. Many of the countries represented here are currently engaged alongside the Iraq security forces in their struggle against the barbaric fanatics of ISIS. Our nations and our partners in the Arab world have a direct interest in defeating ISIS and its hateful ideology. In Syria, a civil war which started over 3 years ago continues to kill and injure civilians and has displaced millions of people. And I'd like to pay tribute to all of Syria's neighbors who offer safe haven to those fleeing the horrors of war. I've visited refugee camps in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon in the past 2 years, and I thank them for providing refuge to Syrians fleeing the conflict. In September, I had the privilege to represent our Assembly at NATO's summit in Wales. We held a seminar in London immediately beforehand to enable members of our Assembly to help me to shape the speech which I made to our heads of government and heads of state. This was an innovation which I hope will be repeated wherever feasible before future summits. The agreements in Wales provide our alliance with the tools which it needs to do its work. NATO's first responsibility is to protect our own citizens, and the measures adopted at the summit strengthen NATO's ability to respond to threats against any part of our territory. Allies will maintain a continuous military presence in the eastern part of the alliance. They will create a very high readiness force ready to deploy within 48 hours, and they will hold more regular exercises on collective defence. Secondly, the Wales summit confirmed that NATO will continue to play its part in addressing international crises and building peace beyond our borders. In just 1 month's time, Afghanistan will take over full control for its own security. NATO and the international community will continue to support Afghanistan, but the fundamental responsibility for the country's future now lies, as it should, in the hands of the Afghan people and their elected representatives, President Ashraf Ghani and the Afghan Parliament. I welcome the Afghan delegation at this session, and I look forward to leading a delegation from our Assembly to visit Afghanistan next month. NATO has been playing its part in the Western Balkans too, and off the coast of Somalia, where NATO ships, together with the EU and navies of many other nations, have driven back the pirates and reopened a safe passage for merchant ships. The summit also confirmed that NATO is prepared to play its part in Libya, Mali, and Iraq by assisting partners to build effective and accountable defence institutions, by supporting the leadership of the United Nations, the African Union, and other multilateral organisations, and by increasing exchanges of intelligence on foreign fighters to combat the influence which ISIS exerts on some of our own young men and women. The impact of a summit, ultimately, will depend not on the agreements reached, but on the readiness of allies to implement these commitments. And these commitments cannot be implemented without adequate resources. At a time of austerity, talking about defence spending is difficult, but we cannot duck this issue. After the Russia-Georgia war in 2008, we sent the wrong signals to Russia and to the Middle East by cutting our defence spending by 10% on average over 5 years. And we failed to read the warning signals from Russia, which increased its defence spending by 50% over the same period. Our Assembly has argued that the trend in our defence spending, and in particular the disparity between the United States and European budgets, is not sustainable and must be addressed. The Wales Summit agreed a timetable for increasing defence spending in each member country to 2% of gross domestic product over the next decade, 20% of which needs to be invested in major equipment. I believe that our Assembly has an important role to play in monitoring progress. We have long held discussions on defence spending and must continue to make our voices heard here in our Assembly and in our national parliaments. The creation of a very high readiness force will also require decisions to be made by parliaments, and here again our Assembly has a role to play. Rapid reaction will require rapid political authorization, so we need to adapt our procedures in national parliaments in a way that reconciles the requirements of democracy with operational effectiveness. And these goals won't be met without public support. NATO needs to do more to reach out to the public. Over the past 2 years, I've sought to engage our Assembly in this effort. I'm convinced that we can bring our publics on board if we explain to them in an open and transparent way why we need to invest more in defence. This is what I tried to do in the publication Why NATO Matters, which I produced for our spring session in Vilnius. And this is also the rationale for the Citizens' Guide, which I prepared for this session, which seeks to explain the Wales Summit decisions. I believe that our Assembly has already made a difference. We've prompted NATO to publish its accounts. We've secured a commitment in the Wales Declaration to greater transparency and financial accountability. We've established an active, regular and constructive dialogue with NATO's highest authorities, and our reports and resolutions help to inform our citizens about our alliance's priorities and policies. More, however, can be done, and I know that my successor, Congressman Mike Turner, will carry this work forward. NATO exists to defend our values, democracy, the rule of law, our commitment to the rights of women and children, and this new commitment to transparency and accountability. The transatlantic bond is a unique and irreplaceable link which unites Europe with North America. During the past 2 years, together with Mike Turner, I've worked actively to build support for our alliance in the United States Congress and to strengthen support for the United States in Europe. Last but not least, while NATO has never sought to recruit new members, its door must remain open to any European state which wants to join and meets the criteria for membership. Enlargement, as I said last night, has made NATO stronger and our continent safer, and our Assembly should continue to support aspirant countries. These values, this sense of unity and purpose, are what makes our alliance strong. This is why, as I prepare to hand over my responsibilities, and despite the many severe challenges which we face today, I feel confident in our alliance's ability to make a positive difference in the world, and confident in our Assembly's role and value. I would like to thank you for the trust you have placed in me by allowing me to represent this great organization for the past 2 years, and to thank you for your support, without which we would not have got as much done.